The night was calm, the quiet suburban streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The occasional car hummed in the distance, and the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the smoky aroma of someone's late-night barbecue. Just another peaceful evening in the neighborhood. I pulled into my driveway, easing my black SUV to a stop. It had been a long day, but I'd managed to wrap up work earlier than expected. All I wanted now was a hot shower, a glass of whiskey, and maybe some quiet time with my wife, Emily. She had texted me earlier saying she was staying in for the night, just relaxing. See you later, so I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. But something felt off. As soon as I stepped out of my car, a strange unease settled in my stomach. I couldn't pinpoint why at first, but then I noticed it, the dark sedan parked a few houses down. It wasn't a neighbor's car, and it was positioned awkwardly near the curb, its engine still warm like it had just arrived. I frowned. No friends were supposed to be over. No visitors. Maybe Emily had company, I told myself. Maybe it was nothing. Then I heard it, the muffled thump of music, just loud enough to be noticeable through the slightly open living room window. A steady bass line pulsed beneath the sound of laughter. Male laughter. My jaw clenched. I moved toward the front door, my steps slow and deliberate. Years of military training had honed my instincts, sharpened my awareness. I wasn't the type to overreact, but this was a red flag. My fingers brushed over the door handle. Unlocked. A cold realization slid down my spine. Emily never left the door unlocked. Never. I pushed it open, stepping inside. The house was warm, the dim lighting casting a soft golden glow across the living room. The familiar scent of Emily's floral candles still lingered in the air, but it was mixed with something else. Alcohol. Expensive whiskey. The kind she never drank. And then I saw them. Emily was sprawled comfortably on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, a glass of wine lazily dangling from her fingers. Across from her, sitting like they owned the place, were two men. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with dark skin and an expensive gold chain, smirked as he lifted the whiskey bottle to his lips. His friend, leaner but just as cocky, lounged back on the couch, his arms draped over the cushions like he belonged there. Their conversation had been easy, relaxed. Until they saw me. The smirk on the first guy's face wavered, his grip tightening around the bottle. His friend straightened slightly, his casual posture shifting into something more rigid. But it was Emily's reaction that hit me the hardest. She didn't flinch. Didn't look guilty. Didn't scramble to explain. Instead, she lifted her gaze to mine, her lips curling into a slow, lazy smile. "Oh, you're home early." I didn't move. Didn't respond. Just stood there, watching. And then she did something that made my blood run cold. She turned to the men, tilting her head in amusement, and spoke as if I wasn't even standing there. "Well, boys, looks like we have company." The taller one, Damien, I would later learn, let out a short laugh, but something flickered in his eyes. Unease. He turned to his friend. "Yo, man, you see who that is?" The leaner one, Rico, narrowed his eyes, confusion creasing his brows. Then something clicked. His face changed. I saw it happen in real time, the realization washing over him, the confidence draining, replaced by something else. Recognition. Rico muttered under his breath, barely audible, but I caught it. "No way. That's him. That's the guy. The one who—" He didn't finish. Damien let out a sharp exhale, his grip on the whiskey bottle suddenly tense. "Oh shit." I stayed silent, my expression unreadable as I scanned their faces, my gaze finally landing back on Emily. She wasn't scared. Wasn't panicked. No, she was still smiling. A cruel, almost taunting smile. And in that moment I knew. She wasn't just caught. She wanted me to know. A thick silence filled the room, pressing against the walls like an unseen force. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The air, once warm with laughter and whiskey, had turned heavy, laced with something unspoken. I stood motionless in the doorway, an unmoving shadow against the dim glow of the living room lamps. My eyes, sharp and calculating, moved from my wife to the two men who had made themselves comfortable in my home. "You're early," Emily finally said. Her voice carried a forced casualness, but I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. She lifted her wineglass, took a slow sip, like she needed a moment to collect herself. Then she shrugged. So what? It doesn't concern you. The words hung in the air, sharp as a knife. I didn't flinch. My face remained unreadable, a mask of quiet calculation. The taller man, Damien, the one who had muttered my name in recognition just moments ago, shifted slightly in his seat. He tried to play it cool, but I saw the way his fingers twitched against his knee. The other one, Rico, broader and cockier, was slower to catch on. He leaned back again, stretching his arms over the couch, his grin lazy and full of arrogance. "Look, man," he said, his tone laced with amusement. "No need for drama. We were just—" I took a single step forward. The grin on his face faded. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, I reached to the side and pressed my thumb against the light switch. The room plunged into darkness. A beat of silence. Then a sharp inhale, a chair creaking, the unmistakable sound of someone shifting uneasily. Rico let out a short, nervous chuckle. "What is this? Some kind of intimidation thing?" Click. The dim glow of a small lamp in the far corner flickered on, its weak light casting jagged shadows against the walls. I was closer now. The air had shifted, and they all felt it. "Are you sure about your choices?" My voice was quiet, steady, the kind of tone that made people listen. Emily let out a sharp breath, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic, Alex," she scoffed, her voice taking on that condescending edge she used whenever she thought she had the upper hand. "You always act like you own me." I tilted my head slightly, considering her words. Then, without looking away, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed, casting a cold light over my face. A soft beep followed. Damien stiffened. His nostrils flared slightly, as if something had clicked in his mind. His voice was lower now, more controlled. "What did you just do?" I smiled. Just a small, humorless curve of my lips. "You don't like surprises, do you?" Rico exhaled sharply and leaned forward, shaking his head. "Listen, dude, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we're done here. We just—" He started to rise from the couch. I took another step forward. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just slow, measured. A movement that sent a chill down the room. Rico froze mid-motion. Damien swallowed hard. "Look, man, no need to." I turned my gaze on him. It was enough to pin him in place. "You thought you were in control," I murmured, like the idea actually amused me. "That was your first mistake." The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Emily exhaled loudly, her frustration cutting through the tension. "Enough of this," she snapped. "You don't scare them, Alex. You're just—" Click. The refrigerator shut off. The house went silent. No hum of the appliances. No faint noises from outside. Nothing. The power was still on, the lights still dimly glowing, but there was an unnatural stillness now. As if the entire house had been disconnected from the world. Damien inhaled sharply. His eyes darted around, searching for something, anything that explained the shift. Rico clenched his jaw. "What the hell is going on?" I let out a slow breath, lowering my voice. "You thought you were the ones playing a game," I said, my words slow and deliberate. "But you've been in mine since the moment I walked through that door." Emily's smug expression wavered. For the first time that night, doubt crept into her eyes. The trap had closed. And they all knew it. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing inward, the air growing thick with tension. The once warm and buzzing atmosphere had turned into something else entirely, something colder, heavier. Damien shifted uneasily on the couch, his bravado slipping. Rico clenched his jaw, his fingers twitching against his knee. I saw it, the calculations running through his mind. Fight or flight. And then there was Emily. She still sat there, arms folded, her legs crossed, trying to mask her unease with defiance. But I knew her too well. She was starting to feel it. The shift. The slow, creeping realization that she wasn't in control of this moment. I was. I took another step forward. The hardwood creaked beneath my weight. "You seem nervous," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. Damien scoffed, forcing out a short laugh. "Man, this is—" I moved. Fast. Too fast. 1 second I was standing near the doorway, the next I was towering over him, forcing him to lean back against the couch. "Keep talking," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Damien's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. He lifted his hands slightly, palms facing up in a universal gesture of surrender. "Look, no need for this," he muttered. "We didn't know she was married. She didn't say a word about—" I tilted my head, my gaze drilling into him. "Didn't know," I repeated, my tone sharp. Damien hesitated. "Yet you recognized me the moment I walked in." Rico shifted in his seat, his breathing growing heavier. "You're—" His voice was quieter now. "You got a reputation." I let out a small, humorless chuckle. "People talk," I said, watching them carefully. "And yet here you are." The air thickened around us. "You want to know the real problem?" I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's that you thought this was just another night. A few drinks, some laughs, a woman who didn't belong to you. But now you're waiting. Waiting to see what happens next. Feeling that weight in your chest. That knot in your stomach." I took another step back, letting my shadow stretch across them. "That feeling," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "That's fear." And for the first time that night, Damien and Rico truly felt it. The neighborhood outside was still. The streetlights flickered weakly, their glow casting long, distorted shadows through the blinds. Moments ago, this house had been filled with easy laughter and clinking glasses. Now, the air was suffocating, thick with something heavier than words. I stepped forward, my boots pressing deliberately against the hardwood floor. The sound was quiet, but in the silence, it carried weight. A predator moving toward its prey. Damien shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence unraveling. Rico's fingers twitched at his sides, his eyes darting toward the door. An escape route. The instinct to survive was kicking in. I noticed. I always noticed. With the flick of a switch, the living room was plunged into darkness once more. The only light came from the street lamps outside, slashing jagged patterns across their faces. A whisper of movement. A subtle shift in presence. Then, the soft click of the door locking. Rico inhaled sharply. Damien took a small, instinctive step forward. "Look, man, this ain't—" "Quiet." My voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The command cut through the room like a blade. Emily let out a loud, exasperated sigh from the couch. "This is ridiculous, Alex. What do you think you're—" "Shut up." I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. But the weight behind the words was enough to stop her mid-sentence. Her mouth opened, then closed, as she blinked in stunned silence. I turned my attention back to the two men. "You see," I started, rolling my shoulders as if loosening up, "the problem isn't what just happened here." I let the words sink in. "The problem is that you thought you could." Damien let out a nervous chuckle, his attempt at bravado falling flat. "Man, I don't know what kind of movie scene you think this is, but we should—" "You should stop talking," I interrupted. Damien hesitated. I took another step closer, my eyes locking onto Rico's first. Calculating. Dissecting. Then, I shifted my gaze to Damien. "Do you know why you should be scared?" A muscle twitched in Damien's jaw. His mouth opened, then shut. "Because you recognized me," I answered for him. Rico's breathing grew heavier. "I don't," Damien started, but I cut him off. "Yes, you do." Rico swallowed hard. His lips barely moved, but the words left his mouth like a whispered prayer. "It's him." Damien turned toward him sharply. "Shut up, man." But Rico shook his head, his voice cracking slightly. "It's him." I let the silence settle. "You handled his crew a while back," Rico muttered. Damien stiffened. He was a man who was used to controlling the room, used to people fearing him. But right now, the balance had shifted. I sighed, shaking my head like I was disappointed. "You see, that's the problem with guys like you," I said, my voice calm. "You think fear is something you give. Something you control." I stepped forward, just enough to force them to tilt their heads back slightly to maintain eye contact. "But real fear," I continued, tapping my fingers against my wrist in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Real fear doesn't need a gun waved in your face. Doesn't need shouting or threats." I let the words hang in the air. "Real fear," I said, my voice now just a whisper, "is when you realize you have no control over what happens next." Rico's breathing hitched. Damien's bravado was officially gone. The silence stretched. The tension tightened around them like a noose. Then I moved. Rico barely had time to react before I was on him. The moment he tried to run, I hooked my foot around his ankle and yanked. He hit the ground hard, a sharp grunt escaping his lips as his shoulder smacked against the hardwood floor. His body tensed, but before he could push himself up, I grabbed his wrists and forced them behind his back. The plastic cable ties snapped into place, tightening mercilessly around his skin. He let out a shaky exhale. He knew. Damien hadn't moved. He wasn't stupid. His body was stiff, his mind running through the possibilities, fight or flight. Neither was in his favor. I turned toward him, my grip still firm on Rico's bound wrists. The remaining cable ties dangled from my fingers. His lips parted slightly, his chest rising and falling as if measuring his breaths. "On your knees," I said quietly. Damien swallowed hard. "Man, listen." I took a step forward. He dropped. I crouched beside him, looping the tie around his wrists, pulling it tight. His breathing was sharp now, controlled, but betraying the panic underneath. I stood back up, looking at them. Two men. Bound. Helpless. No longer the ones in control. Then, I turned my gaze to Emily. She had been frozen this entire time. Sitting on the couch, wine glass forgotten, her fingers curled tightly against the fabric of her dress. For the first time, her confidence cracked. "Alex," she breathed. I didn't respond. I just grabbed another set of ties. Her eyes widened. She scrambled back, her hands pressing against the couch cushions as if she could sink into them. "Wait." I moved fast. She let out a sharp gasp as I grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. "Alex, no. Stop." She thrashed against me, twisting, kicking out, but I had her. Her wrist was delicate compared to Damien's or Rico's. It barely took any effort at all to yank both of them behind her back, the plastic sliding over her skin before she could even register what was happening. The cable ties tightened with a harsh snap. Her breathing came fast and shallow, her body still wriggling against the binds. I turned her around, making her face me. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. Not annoyance. Not irritation. Fear. "You chose them," I said simply. She shook her head quickly, blonde hair falling in messy strands around her face. "Alex, please." I reached down and grabbed the roll of duct tape from the table. Tore a strip. Pressed it firmly over her mouth. Her words died in a muffled whimper. I stood up, exhaling slowly, surveying my work. 3 people. Bound. Silent. No more lies. No more excuses. Then I looked at them and gave a simple command. Move. The air inside the house had turned suffocating, thick with the weight of what had just happened. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, surveying the 3 people in front of me. Emily. Damien. Rico. All bound. All silent now. The 2 men who had been so full of confidence, lounging on my couch, drinking my whiskey, laughing in my home, now sat on their knees, their wrists secured behind them with industrial-strength cable ties. The once arrogant glint in their eyes was gone, replaced by something I recognized well. Fear. And Emily, my wife, the woman I had once trusted, had once thought I knew, now sat on the floor against the coffee table, her body tense, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her mascara smudged slightly beneath her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't looking at me with defiance. For the first time, I saw real regret. But it was too late for that. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders, letting the moment stretch between us. Then I moved. Damien flinched when I reached down, grabbing him by the arm and yanking him to his feet. "Get up." His knees buckled slightly before he caught himself, his breathing sharp and uneven. I turned to Rico. "You too." He hesitated for just a second too long. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and hauled him upright, his body stiff under my grip. Emily pushed herself back slightly, shaking her head. "Alex, please," she whispered. Just stop. Let's talk about this." I stared at her for a long moment, and then, without a word, I grabbed the roll of duct tape from the table, tore a long strip, and pressed it firmly over her mouth. Her muffled protest was barely audible. "Now we're done talking," I murmured. Damien inhaled sharply, his body tense, but he didn't say a word. "Good." I grabbed my keys from the counter, then motioned toward the front door. "Move." Neither of them hesitated this time. They walked, slowly, stiffly, toward the exit, their wrists bound behind them, their balance awkward. Emily followed, her eyes darting toward the door, the windows, the street beyond. She was realizing what was happening. What came next? And I saw it, the moment that true panic took hold. I guided them out onto the driveway, the cold night air hitting them like a slap. The quiet of the neighborhood made every sound feel amplified. The shifting of their feet on the pavement. The soft rustling of leaves. The distant hum of an approaching car. I opened the back of my SUV and nodded toward the trunk. "In." Damien blinked. "You're kidding." I didn't respond. I just grabbed the back of his neck and shoved him forward. He let out a sharp grunt as he stumbled inside, landing hard against the carpeted interior. Rico went next, his body tense, but he didn't fight it. He climbed in slowly, awkwardly, shooting me one last wary glance before I slammed the door shut behind them. Emily stood frozen, her breath ragged. I turned to her. Her eyes widened. And for a second, for just a split second, she thought I was about to throw her in there with them. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed her by the arm, spun her around, and shoved her toward the passenger seat. She stumbled but caught herself, her eyes snapping toward me in confusion. I reached past her, opened the door, and gestured inside. "Get in." Her gaze flickered between me, the street, and the car, her mind racing. I could see the calculations. Could she run? Scream? Would someone hear her? She didn't get the chance to find out. I grabbed her by the waist and lifted her into the seat, slamming the door shut before she could do anything else. Then, without a word, I walked around to the driver's side, got in, and started the engine. The low rumble of the SUV filled the night air. And then we drove. The road stretched out ahead of us, long and empty, the streetlights casting streaks of orange light against the pavement. The silence in the car was deafening. Emily sat beside me, her chest rising and falling in panicked breaths, the duct tape still pressed firmly over her lips. In the back, Damien and Rico barely moved. They knew better than to ask where we were going. I wasn't driving toward the city. I wasn't heading toward any familiar streets. I was taking them somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one would come looking. My hands were steady on the wheel, my mind clearer than it had been in a long time. They had no idea what was waiting for them. And neither did Emily. The road stretched endlessly before us. The houses had disappeared. The distant hum of the highway faded behind us. We were in the outskirts now. Past the familiar. Ahead, in the distance, a single red light glowed in the dark. A railroad crossing. A long, slow-moving freight train rumbled past, blocking the road ahead. The perfect moment. The perfect symbol. I pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. And then, I turned to face them. Damien's breathing had grown shallow. Rico's eyes darted between me and the door, calculating the distance, the chances of escape. Emily. She was trembling now. Good. I reached for my knife. A slow, deliberate movement. The blade flicked open with a quiet snick. Damien's body went rigid. Rico let out a shaky breath. I leaned over, gripping Emily's chin between my fingers, forcing her to look at me. "You think you can walk into my house," I said, my voice soft, almost conversational, "and take something that belongs to me?" A muffled whimper escaped her lips. I let the silence stretch. "Then, Slowly I reached up and tore the duct tape from her mouth. She gasped, sucking in a sharp breath. "Alex," she whispered. "Please. Just let me go." I smiled. And then I pressed the knife into her hands. She froze. Confused. Terrified. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper. "Cut them loose." Her breath hitched. "What?" "You heard me." Her hands shook as she fumbled with the blade, turning toward the back seat. Damien and Rico sat frozen as she slowly, awkwardly, sawed through the cable ties around their wrists. The moment their hands were free, they didn't hesitate. They bolted. Out of the car. Into the night. I didn't chase them. I didn't have to. They wouldn't talk. They wouldn't dare. Emily was still in the passenger seat, staring after them, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Slowly, she turned back to me. "Why?" she whispered. I met her gaze, my voice quiet. "Because I wanted you to see it." Her lips trembled. "See what?" I reached for the door handle and stepped out into the cool night air. Then I leaned down, staring into her wide, terrified eyes. The moment everything changed. And then, without another word, I walked away, leaving her there, alone, trapped, with nothing but the weight of her own choices. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.